Public international law is essentially law between nations, between countries, or international organizations like the UN would certainly come under the rubric of public international law.
Public international law can be more accurately thought of, so to speak, as international treaties and levels of cooperation between sovereigns, between different sovereigns. So it might be the United States and Mexico. So,
the private international law area is really where most of the work is. We, as a firm, typically represent companies, private individuals, as a litigator or someone that practices arbitration. My work is representing folks in those disputes. So that is typically a matter for private international law, if it's an international issue, as opposed to a dispute between states, which would be governed more on the public level.
Private international law, which is really advising your clients on cross-border transactions or cross-border disputes, may not be as geographically limiting in terms of where you want to kind of carry out your profession, basically. So our law firm of Haynes & Boone has a very deep Latin American section. We have over 70 attorneys in our firm who work in this area, and they're sprinkled around Dallas, Houston, New York, Washington, D.C., Mexico City, and Rio de Janeiro. And so we all work together in a collaborative way to serve our clients on a variety of cross-border matters, some in the energy sector, some in the aviation sector, in a variety of areas.
Cross-border Mexico is just a subset of international transactions generally where it'll involve some transaction where the one party's in Mexico and one's in the U.S., or multiple, or even various countries.
There are, we generally think of there being two categories of international arbitration. There is international commercial arbitration, which is a dispute resolution generally between two private parties, as the name implies, a commercial dispute. When parties sign a contract, that contract has a provision for dispute resolution typically, and in this day and age, it typically calls for arbitration. The international aspect, as you would expect, is when that agreement is between parties from different countries, or if the subject matter of the contract has an international element to it. Another kind of international arbitration is what we call investment treaty arbitration, and it arises out of bilateral investment treaties between countries, except that individual investors in a country are, for lack of a better term, the beneficiary of the treaty and its provision that requires the state where the investment is made to arbitrate a dispute with a foreign investor if the foreign investor feels that the state has treated them unfairly. So there's international commercial arbitration and bilateral investment treaty arbitration.
In terms of our discussion about Latin American energy, which is an area that I work extensively in, I think it's an interesting area for young people who are interested in that. I think it combines a lot of different areas and disciplines. Certainly a certain level of business interest and sophistication and appreciation, so to speak, in terms of deploying capital in high-risk areas. A lot of these markets are emerging markets where there's political risk, social risk, and things like that you don't typically encounter in the United States. And therefore, having spent some time abroad, and having some familiarity with those cultures puts you at an important advantage. And as a practical matter, may almost be a basic prerequisite for being in the area.
Mr. Wolfson works with cross-border transactions in India, and he specializes in intellectual property. So he mainly represents pharmaceutical clients in India to make sure that their patents are protected.
I'm primarily a trademark lawyer, and I do copyright work as well. But generally, I protect companies' brands. And so in this role, I work with companies on developing new brands, making sure those brands are brands that they can protect in the various countries where they're doing business or would like to do business, as well as getting protection on those brands by filing trademark applications and so on. And in addition to protecting the brands defensively for my clients, I also go after bad guys. So this can include counterfeiters or competitors who might register trademarks in other countries, and this could be literally in any country across the world. And I could be shutting down either company brands or actually completely shutting down a company, shutting down websites, stopping products from being sold under certain brands that shouldn't be, and so on. And for private law, essentially, lawyers who are working for companies or for law firms in my area, which is intellectual property, are protecting the interests of essentially private citizens or corporations and protecting the brands, copyrights, patents of those private organizations. What's unique and interesting about international law is that first, with respect to the law itself, it is, of course, so varied and can differ tremendously from country to country. The U.S. happens to be rather different from many other countries when it comes to intellectual property law. And so there are certain just substantive differences there. In some ways, it can be what I would consider easier to navigate the U.S. system, but for people who are residents of another country, they might find it harder, but it's just different. But doing international law can be really fulfilling and really interesting for a U.S. lawyer who gets to work with and learn about the laws of so many different countries.
Private equity consists of investors and funds that make investments directly into private companies, usually for the purpose of funding new projects or expanding capital or making acquisitions. The majority of private equity consists of investors who can commit large amounts of money for long periods of time.
So the Dallas Asian American Bar Association was formed in 1988, and it started with about 15 members, and now it's grown to over 300. And our mission is really to promote professional growth for our Asian American attorney members, and to also help them network by providing them opportunities in social settings and CLE, continuing legal education settings, to really get to know each other in the Asian American community. Another major goal that we have is service and giving back to the community. We do that in many ways through targeted community service events where we will help with pro bono legal advice, and also just with general community events like helping at domestic violence shelters, doing what you see here tonight with Legal Lines, and also helping. We have a few high school and middle school and elementary school initiatives that we help roll out throughout the year. Lastly, I would say mentorship. We help with the area law schools and help pair practicing attorneys with law students to make sure that we're really bringing up the next generation of Asian American attorneys and giving them that mentorship and kind of a role model to follow and someone to ask questions of that a lot of the older Asian American attorneys in the Dallas area may not have had that opportunity as they were, going to school and starting their practices. So that's something that we want to change.
Well, Legal Lines is a part of the Dallas Bar Association, and they have a hotline service that they offer to low-income individuals in the local Dallas area that have legal issues, but they don't know who to turn to, which is a big problem for a lot of people. And so local attorneys will volunteer every Wednesday to answer the phone and either direct the individual to the lawyer referral services, which is where attorneys that are specialized in that area of law can help these people, or we'll use our general legal knowledge or knowledge from our personal experience as an attorney to kind of assist them in figuring out, or I guess navigating what way to go or fix their problem. Very important, just because you realize in volunteering at things like this that there's so many people that get so confused in the legal world, and they're threatened by people with lawsuits. They have no idea of even where to start or who to turn to, and legal fees definitely scare people, which is understandable. So it's great to know that there's organizations like Legal Lines, a lot of nonprofits around here, where attorneys volunteer their time to actually walk through this process with people and help them so that they aren't scared by the process, and that they can find justice in what they believe to be true.
International law is doing laws internationally overseas in other countries.
International law, it's like different lawyers, like probably arguing on the country's behalf to get equal rights-ish. I don't know.
So I think interesting things about international law would be that it's so general that you could do a lot of things within international law, and it's never boring because you always have new things to do.
So public international law would be when the cases become public to the public and they're able to go through the case themselves and look at it.
I think private is when if someone goes and visits another country and they find offense to something and they want to personally fight some kind of international law case, then yeah.
Word.
I feel like lawyers just take care of their families and they work really long hours, so they don't have a lot of time to give back to the community. So they basically just focus on their home life.